The man himself is here. Given where we are, and given your history with Brian Epstein...
I only work in mono. Anyway.
It'll be a wall of sound, whatever it is. I wonder if you could maybe just pay tribute to Brian Epstein. What was he like? What were his qualities as a man and a manager?
Well, it was 50 years ago that I was here. I got the job working for him at a Thank You Lucky Stars, can you hear me? Yeah, good, show. When I walked, it was the Beatles, it was the second single, Please Please Me. And in the rehearsals, it occurred to me that this group were going to be tremendously successful, if only for the fact that, like Napoleon and Adolf Hitler, they combed their hair forward. I mean, that, you know, it was true, you know. And so I asked what turned out to be John Lennon, who, you know, who handles you? And I won't, you know, you don't crap where you eat, so I won't attempt the accent, but like, he did, you know, say the guy over there with the paisley scarf, you know, right? And that started a disease because 6 months later, every manager in England, they all had paisley scarves. But Brian gave me the job because at that time Liverpool was a long way from London, might still be, but and you didn't make long distance phone calls except for a death or a birth. I think got a letter, and so I was hired to be the overt PR because there was another guy called Tony Barrow who was doing stuff for Epstein, but he worked for Decca Records, and he couldn't admit he did that. You know, when Decca Records shut at 5, he would use their printer and their stamps to send out stuff on the Beatles, whereas I could use my mouth. Brian, you know, in my new book, Stone Free, which we are, it's dedicated to him. Because most of the places that you go to, if Brian hadn't persevered and got, quote, his lads that recording contract, we wouldn't be here. I mean, I think it's as simple as that.
And you do talk about him also having great belief in his band. I mean, is that the key ingredient to why he was successful in management?
I think just as much as the group having great belief in him as well. It's an equal opportunity. It's a marriage. It's as simple as that. Come on, man. You know, I mean, look, we know what he went through with Decca Records. We know what he, you know, how he was treated, and also in the future, you know, as various films and books and things get, you know, made about Brian, I hope that everybody here in Liverpool in particular helps the world remember, you know, the importance of his actual contribution. And it wasn't what filmmakers and people will necessarily pick on. And I hope the focus is on what this city, what in the last dozen years has really started to embrace and celebrate, and not the stuff that Jude Law would turn it into.
I'm thinking, I mean, about him as a person. I mean, we are in an industry where you do meet people who from an early age seem a bit doomed.
Seem what?
Doomed, you know, kind of live fast, die young types. But Brian didn't seem like that person in the when he was wearing his paisley scarf at Thank Your Lucky Stars, or did he? I mean, what went wrong?
No, not at all. We haven't even done what went right, and you want me to go with what went wrong?
I asked you what you thought his qualities were, and I just kind of wondered.
Well, I'd say it's that there are no accidents, and if you, it is. I can't better the words than it's an incredible marriage where the glove fits on every hand, and you don't actually necessarily have to be what is called qualified today. It's just that they changed his life, he changed theirs, and together they changed the world's life.
If we can rewind, talk about that moment I mentioned in the introduction, Mary Quant. You left school at 15.
Pardon?
So you left school at 15.
16, yes.
16.
Yes.
And you literally found out where the Mary Quant office was. You knocked on the door and you asked for a job.
Right.
And you weren't part of that world beforehand. You went and found that world. And it strikes me that was a person with great confidence and self-assurance. Is that what you were like as a teenager? Yes. Did you have that amount of confidence?
Yeah. Well, you call it an amount. I don't know what the amount is, but you just go and do it. And I don't think it's no different from anybody today who knows what they want and what they don't want. Today you might have too many points of reference, but the carpets were thick, the teacups were thin, and
But what it was different was it was different to a kind of, it's not a job at Woolworths. It was a glamorous job. It was a glamorous job, and was that the world that you were also seeking at that time? The glamorous world?
Most surely, yes.
Yeah.
Another reason for thanking Brian Epstein and the Beatles is we all managed to avoid having to get regular jobs or the future that Harold Macmillan and the like had promised us, which wasn't much, If you weren't born with a spoon in your mouth, later, unfortunately, it went up the nose, but that was the expression, If you weren't to the manner born, the future was pretty prefab, wasn't it,
In terms of your CV, obviously the Rolling Stones is huge in that. And could you just describe to us when you first saw them play and became aware of them and the impact they made?
There was a great, very nice journalist who worked for a paper called The Record Mirror called Peter Jones, and I used to hustle him in a pub on Shaftesbury Avenue. And he told me that there was this band called the Rolling Stones who played in this place in Richmond, and they were going to be writing about this band, and he suggested that I went to see them. And and they were playing on a Sunday, and the Sunday was the day when we all watched Sunday Night at the London Palladium, regardless of who was on it. And you kept your parents, or in my case my mother, company while she did my ironing for the week, and cooked, and and I really didn't want to go and see them. It was Sunday, man, And then somebody told me that we lived in Hampstead, that we could go on the overland train. I went, all right, then I'll go. Otherwise I would have to schlep into Piccadilly and then get a train out, right? That would, on a Sunday, would have taken 2.5 hours, I think. So I went on the overland train. I also had to go, because otherwise how could I go back to the Deham's pub on Strawberry Fields, yes, Shaftesbury Avenue, and hustle Peter Jones on the Tuesday? And if he said to me, well, did you go and see that band? So I had to go, right? And I got there, and when I saw them, this wave came over. I kind of knew what everything I had done thus far was preparation for. There was an advantage in that I really didn't care much about their kind of rhythm and blues. I preferred mine with Lieber and Stoller strings on it. So I had no judgments. I wasn't going, oh, they didn't do this one as well as Long John Baldry, or whatever, right? And this total wave took over me, and I would assume that I was affected exactly the same way that Brian Epstein had been by the Beatles, Second time around, though, what I was talking about, that it was when I did come to Liverpool, about 2 months into working for Brian, and I was also working for Danny Batesh over in Manchester, so we schlepped over, and I walked into his office, and there were these, I thought they were wearing lino, carpets, but they were overcoats. And Brian came out, and there were these 4 tawdry people, and he said, I want you to meet my next number one. And it was Gerry and the Pacemakers, and he was right. And he was right, and he was right again. And he had an amazing run. And I think that that he should have been more. We should at least be able to walk up Epstein Avenue somewhere.
And you actually approached him in terms of managing the Rolling Stones?
Well, not really. I didn't want him to. I mean, I knew what was right and what was wrong, and I kind of went, Brian, what was going on? Right, and hoping he wasn't listening, and he wasn't, because he was very busy. It would not have worked, but out of the manners that we all had at the time, you had to mention it. So manners, by the way, I would be bereft of them, the same way as Mike Love is of hair. But sorry, Gerry. But anyway, if I didn't mention that on one of the magical points of the first time the Rolling Stones and I went to America, we went into the Brill Building, not realizing that The Sweet Smell of Success had been filmed there, but we knew when we got in there. And we were trying to get songs, because at that time the Stones didn't write. And we were up in the offices of Trio Music and Lieber and Stoller, and we didn't have an appointment. So we were basically quasi-shown the door, as happened a lot then. And this very young, engaging, he's still young and engaging, man came out to the elevator just as we were leaving, fuck them, and pulled us back in and played us a number of songs then, one of which we recorded 10 days later. It was Down Home Girl. And that gentleman is here and should be recognized today. It's Mr. Seymour Stein. Okay? Where are you, Seymour? There. Right? And he's been part of our musical, fabric since then, and it's through him that I came to do this event in Brooklyn with Dave. I haven't got the second name together yet, but
Picciolinghi, yeah, Mr. Picciolinghi.
Picciolinghi,
yeah.
Okay.
The
Could
Supreme.
you get a stage name? But anyway, it's Dave Page or something like that, and I'm looking forward to the next. I think, were you going to be in Atlanta? Athens, yes. Georgia, right? I think that's going to be fabulous. And this is great. I mean, I just think that this has been it's been a wonderful addition. Being invited to Brooklyn, and then the thing of being invited here at this particular time, because it is to the week that I met the Rolling Stones, and I've been working for Brian for since February. That's how wonderfully fast life was then. Now you can wait that long for a phone call, right? Anyway.
When you saw the Stones, one of the first things you did was you asked them to put a G at the end of Rolling, so they became the Rolling Stones, and you, in effect, sacked one of the band.
Well, I wouldn't say that. He ended up staying with the band longer than I did.
But he was kind of removed from, for example, the photographs, etc. And so you were not, even at that fairly young age, because you were younger than the band, which was a very unique thing at that time. That you were,
Yeah, but not really, because, I mean, we all knew Bill Wyman was older.
Yeah.
But, because he'd done national service or something. But
you knew what you wanted and what the band wanted.
No, I'm just making the point that you remember when you were young, you didn't mix with people and say, by the way, how old are you, or that. You just got in a room and you either got on or you didn't. So there are, to me, it's no importance except as a soundbite. That I was. We're only talking about 7 months.
I just think that
even a baby.
I presume at that time a lot of bands were managed by more old-style kind of guys who were the generation above, who had the contacts and were doing things in an old-school kind of a way, and you came along and you were doing something very different. And partly that was because of your age.
But there are no accidents again, and the only reason that I was doing something which you call different is because the Rolling Stones and I decided to get on. And he's 6 months younger than us, he'll be good for us. It was just love, attraction, and the trust that went by to be working with people of the same age as opposed to people who were maybe in 27 and seemed like they were 45.
But you weren't afraid to make those decisions. That's what I'm saying. As a manager, to get rid of one.
No, but you can't even use the words. As a manager.
Were you the manager?
Yeah, I know, but not. There wasn't a charter. Wait. You know what I mean? Like you're thinking. I hope the way that what the record business is becoming, that nobody who is the same age or whatever the new 19 is not impeded by what they've witnessed or seeing people like me sit here and say what I did or what other people have done, because it really doesn't matter. It's like, are you going to do what is correct for the person you're going to be working with? That's all that it's about. I mean, to call me a manager is nice, but, I was just like hustling,
George Melly wrote Revolt into Style.
Wonderfully, didn't he? Yeah. See, those books are really interesting. The George Melly book, Revolt into Style, and the Nick Cohen book, because they were written before we knew that the wheel was not going to be reinvented and Duran Duran wouldn't make any difference. And, that we'd still be here. And these books that were written at that time, I mean, I was reading the Nick Cohen book the other day, and he actually said about a Who record, half of the album was crap, which nobody would do, unfortunately, in this day and age, because everybody depends for the food on their table from, feeding off this buzzard of an industry. And it was so refreshing to read those words. It was crap.
Well, George Melly said, Andrew Loog Oldham looked at Jagger like Sylvester looks at Tweety Pie.
Yeah.
So,
but you see, I fortunately never knew what that meant. And made a point of never, I think it was a stoat, I know that's some kind of, well, I wasn't interested, I was more interested in the lighting that Tony Curtis had in The Sweet Smell of Success.
Yeah.
And The Rain on Broadway.
But I guess what you're suggesting is that you have...
I don't want to know what I was
suggesting. I'm asking, but if we're accepting that the book, the George Melly book was interesting, I'm trying to understand, and that has kind of become part of the legend that you were some kind of element of puppet master. Now, and I might be playing devil's advocate here, but I'd just like to kind of know, what was the balance of power? I think it's interesting to, both historically and in terms of how managers and bands work.
You see, power, and there was no balance. We were just incredible. Also, that you had the balance of power was that every 12 weeks you had to come up with a single. I can't, I can't analyze it in the terms that you're, looking at, because this is post-70s. This is John Savage land. It's a very, when it became anyway, I just can't, power doesn't come into it.
So in terms of, in that book that we talked about, where the George Melly quote is, that obviously you talk in stoned as well, your voice is in stoned.
Yeah.
And you talk about Jagger in what I found very intriguingly. You say he was thin, wasteless, giving him the human form of a puma with a gender of its own.
Yeah.
And I'm actually,
today I'd make simple, so it's like Neuref without AIDS, you know.
I'm interested in that idea, that the androgyny that you saw.
I gave it to you, man. It's like today, it's like Neuref without the AIDS.
And do you think that was something that should be brought, that you felt the band needed to recognise or bring to the fore?
No. Because you work with what you've got. I mean, I couldn't have applied that to Gerry Marsden.
But at the time, that we're talking about the early 1960s, we're talking about, gender roles.
I think I'm more excited about Eddie Cochran, as a human puma. But I mean, the great thing for me about Stoned and Too Stoned is that it allowed me to work in present time about about what I had done and what the Rolling Stones and other people had done, and allowed me to, I had some sort of a reputation for being influenced by Anthony Burgess and writing sleeve notes, and those books and the new book, Stone Free, gave me the opportunity to see if I could do it in the long form and straight. So that's basically, and as you've just quoted what I said, which proves what my editor at the time said, that I never met a cliche that I didn't embrace, so.
In that period, the Stones there was something of a moral panic about the Stones, wasn't there? Out there in the big world. They would appear on television and there would be complaints made about the way they looked and the way they dressed. And I'm trying to find out what you thought as their manager.
Yeah.
What really was driving that? And I'm interested in the idea that there was a gender thing going on. There was some kind of threat, maybe, to the in the early 60s, to the idea that there were men and there were women, and then there was the figure of Mick Jagger on television. Yeah. And somehow it was a threat to people, and I'm wondering if...
Well, not necessarily, the same way as like with Johnny Ray and Liberace, although they were a lot further removed than Mick was, that there is something to be said for an artist who, foolishly, the husband or the boy or the male end of of a couple sitting in the stalls, that the husband is not threatened by. And there was a lot of that with Mick Jagger, and there was a lot of that with Johnny Ray, for totally different choices. That the girlfriend or the wife was allowed to enjoy them because the man didn't perceive them as a threat. But that's been, it's as old as show business, but you don't plan it, I have been, even the Rolling Stones go, oh yeah, Andrew made us the opposite. No, I didn't. I recognize that it was like Pat Boone and Elvis, he was the goody two-shoes version of that, or Billy Fury, oh, Billy, right? And Cliff Richards, whatever the most recent examples are. But you can't plan that. All you can actually do, nobody actually invents this. All you can do is recognize the moment as it goes by and embrace it before it slips away. You can't actually sit there and go, we didn't sit there and go, this is what I'm going to do. You just went, for example, the first time that there was a photo call for the Rolling Stones on the Thames embankment. And I thought they looked perfectly reasonable. But one of the photographers, I heard him say, oh, God, they're dirty. you know, and the fact that he said they're dirty was based, he didn't know that Brian Jones washed his hair 11 times a week, but was based on the fact that they were not in uniform. That's how, you know, and I know you'll give me the credit, but I didn't sit there and go, right, if they're not in uniform, I'll get this reaction. I got the reaction because they weren't in uniform.
And I think you are known, obviously, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you are known as, not only were you known as a manager, and I'm still not convinced you weren't the manager, and I'm still the manager.
But I mean, I didn't have the headset of a manager.
No.
That's what I'm saying. And I encourage anybody who is interested in the same gig to make sure that they don't go, as they start the game, to go, this is what I am, because it has severe limitations. It's like going, you know, I'm a bus conductor and it'll only go to Lime Street.
And you were more creative. I mean, you became the producer.
Ah, yes.
So
I would remind you that when we made the first record, and we had £40 for 3 hours, and it was 5 to 6, and the 3 hours were up. And I went, right, that's it, we're done. And the engineer said to me, well, what about mixing it? And I said, what's that? And he explained, and my attitude was that if I wasn't there, I wouldn't have to pay for it. So I said, well, you do that, I'll pick it up in the morning, you know, right? You know, and 18 months later, when I was an expert, right, you know, things had changed. But after that, because that studio was four tracks, 4 channels, we went straight to Regent Sound, which was mono, because as we were all learning, we were all on the game in more senses than one. What we wanted to make sure that what we heard was it. There was going to be no messing around with it by any technical process.
I mean, did you actually kind of go away and learn a little bit about the technical side of production?
No.
So it was. I'm kind of asked. Well, because these days you can go on. You can spend 3 years at university learning how to do music production.
Yeah.
So
No, you're all right. Then you're right in raising that point. But as I said, we had to come out with a single every 12 weeks, which was a godsend, you know. And yeah, well, that process that you go through today, yeah, well, you know, I hope there's a more adventurous form of. I say a more adventurous form of making a living, like gun running, but like. Because that's what it was like. I mean, you know, I've met people, say, who later in life, who were like just the concertina of time, who would just say, because as some of you know, I've lived in Colombia for 35 years. And, you know, I would meet people who were, say, just 5 years, 4 or 5 years younger than me, and they would go, oh, man, you know, like John Lennon, you know, peace and love and stuff. And I say, you know, man, you're very lucky that it was a guitar. It could have been a fucking Bren gun, you know, like, you know, in terms of attitude. It just happened to play chords as opposed to bullets. I don't know where I was going with that, but I mean, you know, it's, oh, I know, the schools, yes. Well, go to school by all means, but make sure they don't wear you out. You know, they don't trim your sails or, you know, give you. There's nothing wrong with jumping in a swimming pool and not knowing whether there's water there or not. I mean, life should be as simple as that. I mean, janitors are overqualified. Don't let the educational system that keeps you there till you're 27 or 28. I mean, if you're meant to stay there till then, please do it. But if your instinct tells you that you should be on the streets a little earlier, please go for it.
I mean, Phil Spector was an influence, though, was he? When he came to production?
Yes. I mean, some said it was a disgusting influence, but at least I didn't bring it into the Rolling Stones sessions. I saved it for other people. You know.
I mean, talk about the.
Phil Spector was wonderful. I mean, he was the first one, a lot of thanks to an American journalist called Tom Wolfe, who you could look at the profession of a record producer and say, well, man, you know, you can be a little bit of a star at the same time, you know. You get I mean, before that, the wonderful American producers that we know, be it, Lieber and Stoller, whomever. Phil was the first one, who became known.
And in Stone, one of the people quoted in Stone says that you were in awe of Phil Spector, and a number of them also say that you and him together were caused a little bit of havoc out there in London when you first met.
Well, during the years that I was out to lunch, I would say that, Grappa was the fire before the match. You didn't need the match, and Phil Spector being with him could be like that. I mean, he was, to start with, let's just deal with the music. Brian Wilson still hasn't got over it. You see, in England they had a very strange way of, there were no songs that actually said, I know this is an Elvis Presley song, but I want you, I need you, I love you, get up against the wall and let me shtup you, right? And the American music was so wonderfully basic, and one of the great things about growing up in that time here was, and it's no different, I suppose, than rap or this or whatever came later, is that American music became our language. Bebop or Lula, The Girl Can't Help It in 1957 were the first videos in our life, and Gene Vincent and Little Richard, that suit, we've never got over that suit that Little Richard wore in The Girl Can't Help It, that grey baby, we're still looking for it, and Eddie Cochran, was lethal, right? And you can see, the few hairs that are here are going up now. And the pop lump in the throat will come, and may we all be served up something that tells us who we are in the way that American music. And also you've got to remember this, that at that stage, although they were here, and God bless them for the chocolate and the nylons in the Second World War, Americans had stayed away from it, and so they were just on the silver screen, and the lighting was great. The dialogue was great, the rain was great, and America, with its culture, gave us hope and, an alternative thing to embrace, so we could tell the BBC with their trad jazz and their skiffle, go away, little girl, Goffin and King. But anyway.
But then the switch came, and the switch came along in 1965. They all wanted a bit of the British bands. Yeah, well, I mean, that was Brian, and that was the Stones. That made that big change, like you say.
Well, really, there's other elements of that. Okay. One of the big stars of our life is the birth pill, because it, prevented us all having to embrace and then push prams, which people now do to get publicity, don't they? Right? But in addition to that, one of the, I work for Stephen Van Zandt of, The Sopranos and Bruce Springsteen doing radio, and his radio format is really based around all of the influences to the most important day in his life is when the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in America, which I think was February the 8th or the 16th in 1964. And so all of the music that is selected is everything that went into influencing that. And then after that, it's all the music that came after, be it the Clash, the 13th Floor Elevators, or whatever. But another important event is the assassination of JFK, which I will say constantly, there are no accidents. I think that had a great subtext as to why the Beatles became what they became in America, because it's no different than those of you who remember the Vietnam War and remember that nobody would really talk about it. The music was the only thing that basically spoke about that war. The people who unfortunately had to participate in it were just mums the word. The same way as when we grew up after the Second World War, there was this, if there were subtitles, look what I sacrificed for you, lad, and America was in a state of bereavement following the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And in terms of the youth that was around the house that was going, oh God, when will my parents get over it, you know, because it wasn't that personal to somebody who was just moving on from perhaps Davy Crockett to Little Richard. And along came the Beatles, man. And then once again, the Beatles had changed our lives, because between the period of October 1962 and February of 1964, those of us who followed the Beatles, and we all did that, let's not ever forget that, have been, oh, well, man, we don't have to toe the line and have a regular job. Then America came, and it suddenly became serious. The tricks we'd used here didn't work. I mean, the Rolling Stones, if the Beatles did look over their shoulders the first 18 months that they conquered America, it wasn't the Rolling Stones they saw, it was Herman's Hermits or the Dave Clark Five. You know, it took us a long time for us to get our vinyl legs moving there. Does that answer the question?
Like you said, with, you know, talk about Brian's achievements and you know, the fact that you know, kids in that post-war period were kind of dreaming of, you know, New York jazz bars or Chicago honky-tonks, whatever the kids listening to the music were dreaming of. But then you had American kids dreaming of Liverpool, and Liverpool became, and Merseybeat became somewhere where kids kids out in wherever, Cleveland, Ohio, thought the Beatles were the vehicle whereby they were dreaming of being in Liverpool. Like I say, that was the switch, wasn't it, in the culture that generation of bands, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and others, created. That was a huge thing for our country, let alone just for Liverpool.
Do you think it was at the time? I mean, travel wasn't what it became, and they might have, but it went no further than buying lunchboxes. They didn't go on aeroplanes and come here like they are, like Liverpool has experienced or Manchester for the last 12 years.
But I think in terms of absorbing music and culture, a lot of it is about feeding those dreams, and people listen to music, and it goes into part of their mind, which is about dreaming of another place, dreaming of escape from where they are.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you.
And
I still do it.
And like I say, kids in Cleveland dreaming of being in Liverpool, but not getting on, but not having, in a way, even not wanting to get on a plane, because then actually the dream.
But you've got to remember how quickly it changed. That by you know, with the outrageousness of the growth of how many Americans were having to go and fight in Vietnam, that by you know, whereas what our American competition at the time was the Four Seasons and the Beach Boys, and then by the middle of the run wasn't that long. By the middle of '66, whether it's the Buffalo Springfield or you know,
Monterey, even.
Pardon?
Monterey.
Well, that's later, but I mean, as early as, like, I think, you know, autumn of '66, American music is starting to speak to the dilemma of their country. It didn't really happen here till '68, right? You know, I mean, in Europe till '68, and the English music that would survive, which in terms of, if you look at it, when I said that if the Beatles did look over their shoulder, they saw Herman's Hermits and Dave Clark Five, that didn't survive that next chapter, because the chapters came very quickly, and those of us who were in limos and penthouses and couldn't write for the street, well, that rule has never changed, you know, would soon be long gone, because you're dealing with you know, the songs that were for America, about America, and either we were relative to that, or we died.
Even to an extent that didn't last, because then you had, you know, Led Zeppelin and The Who doing those major stadium tours by 72, 73. That cultural exchange became a little bit more even, didn't it, after the Beatles?
No, well, you know, in England we went through a stage where the accountants, you know, sort of came in with their golf jackets on Friday, you know, and would stay in the room when you smoked a spliff. And so slowly, you know, I mean, I've seen football footage from the 70s of Manchester teams, and the stalls, or whatever they're called, you know, where all the people are.
Terraces.
Thank you. Right. The terraces. Everybody's still in a hat and a tie, and, you know, this is the 70s, you know, so the 60s is still a strange beast that doesn't necessarily, you know, it doesn't move up, it doesn't move into every cul-de-sac, you know, and it's probably still something that it hasn't pervaded.
Just a couple of things I want to talk about, then I'm going to open it up, if I can, to the audience briefly. Another individual that I'd love to talk about is Marianne Faithfull.
Yes, I had dinner with her the other night.
Oh, so
she's going to be produced by Steve Earle, who is playing here at the end of May, which I think is wonderful. Yeah.
And instead you talk about, again, the first time you saw her, you didn't know whether she could sing, and you kind of ended up not really... wasn't an issue
It didn't
anyway.
actually matter.
So what was it? Again, I mean,
Well, my point of influence was there was a great musical film, High Society, with Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Celeste Holm, and Grace Kelly. And there's a scene at the end where Grace Kelly has her head on Bing Crosby's lap, and they do True Love, the song. And she actually can't sing, but she does one of the sexiest bridges you've ever heard. For you and I have a guardian angel on high with nothing to do. And Seymour finished the lyric for me. But that let me know that Marianne Faithfull could be a star. That the memory of Grace Kelly in that film.
Because although I didn't, we kind of didn't, the Jagger thing didn't really work, but anyway.
The what?
Talking to you about the Jagger thing and gender, but what
didn't work.
No, it didn't work. I don't think we really reached. I don't think we really reached a point of. So, but what I'm kind of behind was talking about.
We don't have long enough to reach those points.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Well,
let's meet again in Athens.
Right.
So, but one of the things behind that question was about the role that sex plays in selling music, and I'm kind of obviously Marianne Faithfull being an example of that?
Oh, yeah. You know, I mean, Grace Kelly was, I mean, was my, I got the chance by Alfred Hitchcock, I suppose, but of course it's sex. I mean, I'm quite sure that Giorgio Armani studied East of Eden for all the colours he uses for Armani Home, the deserts of Salinas and the browns, but he made beige a colour, which is not, I can assure you, but of course it's sex is a friend and a weapon.
What about drugs? Is that are they friends and a weapon as well?
I haven't got any with me, man. Right.
Well, because if we had like 50 years ago, you'd have had some pills.
Yeah.
And again, in the film, you talk about uppers and downers, right. And you talk about your drug use, you talk about heroin use and so on. And I kind of wondered if you felt that that had, I mean, it's a huge question, and anyway, I don't know how you'll answer it, which is why I'm asking it. Was that drug use a help or a hindrance in terms of your life and career?
Well, it was unavoidable. But the difference between, there's basically three versions of the 60s. There's basically from like 1954, from the first records that there were in America, be they Gee Whiz, be it the Everly Brothers, be it Elvis, Fats Domino, and for us, with what we had, which there was nothing wrong with, and that period goes until October of 1962 when the Beatles start. That period basically lasts, I would say, till John Peel time, and in that third period, the public has started taking drugs, which kind of made it a bit confusing. Well, they were harder to sell to. It became, drugs were better when it was a private club, and what I'm saying is that we took drugs in order to fulfill that obligation to have a single every 12 weeks, which I keep going back to, the discipline of anybody can have a hit, but can they have another one and another one, became the rule of the game. But going back to the specifics of what you're saying about drugs, it's the luck of the draw. There are, Keith turned out to be the pyramids. You know, he's still there, right? I wasn't so lucky, but in that I, you know, had addictive tendencies. I mean, I still can't walk past a watch shop without going into a dither, you know. I mean, addiction is addiction. I won't even say I paid for it. I was very lucky that God sent me to Columbia, where I learned wholesale decorum. It all works out. You know, we're not really in charge. We should just do the first thing that comes in the brain every day.
And was there was a point, though, when you kind of decided that you didn't want drugs in your life anymore?
Yeah, something was delivered to the house, 5 or 10 grams, who's counting, and I tried it and said, "Oh, this is awful, we should finish it." And I thought about that and thought, you know, maybe Verve were right. And then my run had, you know, that long distance race was over, and I returned to, but it, you know, it's no actual big deal. I'm very lucky that I was able to deal with it. I was very lucky that I had the support of a family, and I was also very lucky that in my life still vanity rules, and I did not wish to leave, you know, a legacy of having fallen over or turned into a gargoyle or been a casualty, you know.
The final question from me is, going back to that Mary Quant thing and walking up to, knocking on the door, you were 16, yeah. And I wondered if, you know, more than 50 years later, if you time travelled, what advice or encouragement, if any, would you, from your perspective now, give the teenage Andrew Loog Oldham at that moment?
Well, I mean, we've touched on it many times while we've been talking this afternoon. If you ask somebody who you think you respect for advice, be ready to decide they're wrong when they give you that advice. You be prepared to jump into a swimming pool without water. You know, dogs can swim, so can you. You know, don't get overqualified. Only be, you know, and don't actually be. I mean, I'm very lucky in that well, we know that, but from the point of view that when I worked for Brian Epstein. Well, this is a reasonable example. I had no dreams of becoming a manager or a record producer. I only became that because it became what I had to do to serve the Rolling Stones. It was as simple as that. And they felt safe with me in a studio for all the opposite reasons of why the Beatles felt safe in the studio, you know, in that sort of Doctor Who environment in EMI and Abbey Road, with all those people who blessed them with not only their technical knowledge, but the different stratus of class of what kind of musical arrangers they were, be it George Martin or Jeff Emerick. Or, you know, you get what you deserve in life, and so if you walk around and think you're responsible for it, you're a schmuck.
Have we got any house lights, by the way? We got anyone, just because I'm a DJ and I can't hear well, and obviously when it's dark I can't see well, so it's going to be hard to take questions. Okay, no house lights. So, can you raise a hand if you have a question for Andrew? Do you want to take the questions, or shall I pick the people?
Well, you can't see them. So, you know.
We're really just stuck with the front row at this point.
No, you know, if somebody stands up and yells, we'll get it.
Go.
Right, you know.
4 dinner party guests, who are they?
Graham Greene, Bob Dylan, Albert Grossman, and Anthony Burgess.
What would you eat?
Huh? Each other. Thank you, Garrett.
What was Brian Jones like?
I see. That's usually question number 3. He was extremely talented, as you know, but he was like a cat, and I don't mean the jazz term, who had lived his 9 years, had his 9 lives, and somebody made a mistake and sent him back for the 10th, and then recalled him, actually in a process that is called Saturn Return. If you look at that club of 27-year-old people, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, all the people who died, they're all at 27. And it's a process called Saturn Return because they've used up their lives. The next chapter ends between 56 and 50, I'll get to your question, like 56 and 58, and the charter members of that club are Steve Jobs and George Harrison, who'd run out of life at that particular stage. But he just wore himself out. Simple as that. What was he like? I didn't like him, so we don't need to dwell on that. He was very difficult to get along with, unless you were playing guitar with him. Well, that, put a nod on it. It went quiet, didn't it?
Well, Andrew does know everything because I briefly met him this morning and he said, well, when we come to questions from the audience, there's always going to be one, what was Brian Jones like? He actually said that. You're operating on a different level to the rest of us.
Well, it's usually question number 3. But, Sandy Shaw was good too, but...
What's question number 2?
I don't know, but Brian Jones is always number 3,
Is there a particular moment that sticks out to you from your career?
I'm sorry, louder?
Is there a particular moment that sticks out in your career?
Tonight? Listen, it's all of the same importance. A lot of what is, a worldwide event at the time was a giggle. We took it seriously, but you can't afford to take it as seriously as it's being taken now. Otherwise, you would just fold it up and gone into an envelope and never come out again. If you went, oh God, we're changing the world. Our world was being changed, but you've got to, it's the survivors have a perspective on it, that makes them the survivors, or the rest fall over. So, it's all great. There's nothing like being right about certain things, but I equally remember being wrong about things. I remember in 1964 I retired. I was having a very bad week, and I wrote about it in the newspapers, like boom, 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 and stuff. But it's all good. It's all, it's 50 years, but it's also just 50 minutes.
I'm wondering about that, you mentioned Brian Jones, and I mentioned earlier about Ian Stewart.
Yeah.
It was question 2, and Ian Stewart. And, part of the role of the manager, or anyone living a life in music, even on my level, you make enemies. And I wondered if you could give us some advice. How long do you bear a grudge for, or one should bear a grudge for? And do you get to a point where you feel like you need to make peace with people?
No. I work at making peace with myself. Because if I don't love myself, and if I'm not at peace with myself, I certainly don't have the capacity to be in love, peace, or war with anybody. Sometimes war is required.
There's a bit in the book where you talk about Eric Easton, who was you co-manager, whatever, worked with you in the early part of the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And obviously there was a major falling out, and there was all kinds of stuff flying around.
Right.
And as he was dying, you attempted to phone him and talk to him.
Well, I didn't know he was dying till I got on the phone, man. I actually wanted stuff for my book.
Right.
So,
so that wasn't a process of making peace with anyone.
No. I mean, And in terms of Ian Stewart, I mean, he did marry a lady who worked for me, and I went to stay with her in 70s or the 80s, right? And he came in from playing golf, and I was in the kitchen by myself, and I thought, well, man, you know, if he's held the grudge, now is that he's going to woof me, right? You know, but he didn't, because he knew that he knew who had done it. I mean, after all, if I said to the Rolling Stones, Ian Stewart has to be put in this position, it was they who agreed with it, whether it was tacitly or whatever. Anyway, the irony about Ian Stewart is that 15 years later, he's a dead ringer for Morrissey, man, and he'd be a lead singer. So, you know, and the other reason that Ian Stewart had to be put on the sidelines is I thought that people couldn't count more than 4 or 5. I mean, do you remember the name of the Hurricanes with Johnny and the Hurricanes? No.
I remember Johnny.
Johnny, exactly, right? But we don't remember the Hurricanes, and I wanted everything. So I didn't want us just to remember Brian Jones, because he was the leader of the band at the time, at the beginning. It's all fate. I mean, and you make your own luck, and good luck is somebody needing you, basically.
Did I get a sign saying that we need to wrap up now? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, I will, in the spirit of rock and roll, carry on. I'll take 2 more questions. So there's the front row here, and then there's somebody at the back.
How was it working and being friends with George Gallagher and the Poets?
That was very pleasant. It was a very nice diversion. I was in the middle of spending time in Glasgow qualifying to get married. And 3 weeks is a long time. And so I was very happy that when I passed through Glasgow Airport, I saw this very charismatic-looking bunch on the front of a Scottish magazine. I went, who are they? They're the Poets. And I went round and grabbed them and recorded them. And they were great.
And last question from the back there.
Is there any acts that you wish you managed to work with?
Are there any acts that you wish...
No, I'll get it. Virulent, no. Not really. Willie DeVille, but he didn't trust anyone who wasn't on opiates. You get what you're supposed to get, you know. So I mean, that kind of wishful thinking list, I think, is probably could be fatal. You know, I'd like to say Lionel Richie, but you know, I won't, because he's a great songwriter. You know, I mean, and any of you who, obviously you've come here, you haven't come here because you're going to become tailors and cutters, but you, the song is the, you know, all you got to do is really make sure whoever's doing it does it in the right key, you know, an attractive key. You're coming back to sex again. The song is the thing that still has the ability. I mean, I was at an event at the end of last year with Roger Daltrey, and it was the passing, the saying goodbye to one of the great managers, Chris Stamp and Kit Lambert. And Roger said, I asked where Pete Townsend was. He said he's out selling books. And Roger said, you know, our music can still change the world. And it does. I mean, their music still does. And we mustn't forget that fact. And the driving fact is songs. And I you know, if I worship at any altar, it's the song and the incredible, any God-given, it doesn't matter whether it's Red String from Madonna or it's the Catholic Church, but the ability to write songs is, to me, just to be around people who've been able to do that has been probably one of the major gifts in my life.